this video, we're going to talk about some quick anatomy studies and ways you can take notes to improve your retention so you can draw these things from imagination later. Let's go. Alright, welcome to the video. I'm Taylor Payton at thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, and I'll be guiding you through this process. So as a beginner, when you're first studying anatomy or figuring out how to make your drawings better and how to draw better from imagination, one of the biggest hurdles that you run up against is how to memorize things so that you don't always have to look at reference. Now, for a long time, you are going to be looking at reference, just like you see me doing here. I'm just grabbing a bunch of photos from stock sites like Pexels or running and saving them from Pinterest or something like that. And I just load them up into Photoshop or my drawing program of choice. And then I begin to study and break them down. Now, the reason why we would be doing this is so that we can draw them with more accuracy and thus try to remember the things that we're seeing. So for one, I can already see that it's symmetrical. You know, we are symmetrical as human beings, so I just go ahead and I copy and paste from one side to the next because we are in a very orthographic or flattened pose. Now, these poses are very easy to work with because, of course, they are symmetrical, and it allows us to see that, okay, well, if I draw one side accurately, then I can kind of hack it and flip to the other side if somebody's at a particular angle. Now, you'll see with the other study, this is not the case. But in the first study, we do have this lucky sort of symmetry going on. What I'm really doing when I'm studying and looking at photos is I'm trying to get it down in the simplest way that I can so that I'm not drawing every single muscle, every single mark, every single line. I just want to know the proportions of something, and I will give myself little notes like you're about to see me do here. I will go in and change the color of something by locking the transparency and filling it in, and then I will write myself actual notes in the document so that I can remember things like, oh, well, a female back is actually pretty wide in some instances. So that's something that I really want to recall, is that, well, there's a great deal of taper from the top among the shoulder girdle all the way down to the waist, where things typically get the most slim if there is a lower body fat percentage. I will make circles and I will highlight certain areas so that I'm able to really think about things like the overlap that I'm seeing. And this overlap is really important because we know what forms are going to be in front and what forms are going to be falling behind, which means we're going to have an informed decision when it comes to how we place our lines. So I'm already thinking about the areas of overlap, thinking about the taper, thinking about the proportions, meaning the relative lengths of different parts to one another. So let's, for example, the upper arm from the shoulder to the elbow is about as long as the elbow to the wrist. So things like that I'm trying to remember so that whenever I'm drawing certain poses, I can keep that in mind even in things like foreshortening. So now we're moving on to a different photo, which has less of a fitness bent and more of a fashion type photo shoot. And this one I noticed the girl had an even larger back, so her build is even stronger than the image that I was drawing before. So that's one thing I note, is the differential in body types. She also has a little bit more fat going on. She's not, you know, really fat by any means, at least not from the back. You can see the waist has a great deal of taper too. So it's just that she has a broader shoulder girdle and she stores a little more fat in her back. So these are things that I'm just kind of noting as I work through these studies, these areas of overlap, how BMI affects what I can and can't see as far as some of the bones coming toward the surface. And I'm just copying the shapes that I see as best as I can. Obviously there's a rose in front of her face, and this isn't really a face study. It's more of a study of female backs. So you just go through and you don't get overwhelmed by too many, you know, areas of detail. You just want these sort of big shapes and these big proportions to come together in ways that you can memorize, so that when you are working on something, say a sketch, and you don't need to take it to the next level yet, the next level of refinement, then you won't need reference to make it look halfway decent or to get your idea halfway there. Now, it does take a lot of refinement when you're finishing something to get it to a level where it's really believable and much more accurate, and in that case I always recommend reference. I do it pretty assiduously in my beginner drawing course 2nd edition in lesson 4 when we're finishing up a drawing from a sketch to a more polished version. So, but in the cases of studying, what I find myself often doing is, again, taking notes, highlighting areas, and it just really has a healthy effect on your retention if you can actually type out your notes or write out your notes and if you're actually highlighting certain areas. This is just classic study technique applied to drawing, so that you have a greater degree of inculcation when it comes to getting things into your mind and not having them just slip out the second you study them. I used to do a lot more studies, and I wouldn't remember half of what I did because, for one, I wouldn't apply it to anything. I wouldn't go out and draw females from behind after drawing a bunch of female backs from imagination, which is something that obviously decreased retention, but I also wasn't taking any notes, and I wasn't utilizing any highlights at all. So I just started applying those techniques, and then I find that I can conjure the image in my head a lot easier and execute it easier on the picture plane. Now, I don't take as many notes with eyes, or at least I didn't in this particular demonstration, but I still wanted to do them from reference. For example, drawing them from the side, from the front, and from below. So another great way to increase retention and increase your ability to draw stronger in general is to attack something from multiple angles. So again, I'm just grabbing a bunch of stock photos from Google and whatnot, and I'm breaking them down into their big shapes. So we have the dark shapes of the eyelashes, we have the iris and the sclera, which is the white part is the sclera, and the pupil, which sits inside the iris, and you have a little highlight from the strongest light in the room reflecting itself off the eye. And then we also have this eyebrow, which is a pretty simple shape. I then went and I blew up another reference photo. If it's a little too small, just blow it up so you can really see the shape there. And one thing I always keep in mind when I'm studying eyes is I want the thickness in there. I want to think about how both lids have a degree of thickness to them as they cover the sphere that is the eye. That's something that I'm always very aware of. And I'm always trying to think of, okay, well, how much of the sclera does the iris take up and the pupil of the iris? So again, thinking of proportions, thinking of things in their relative shapes amidst one another is something to always have great consideration of. So there's another eye there, and then we go down to this gentleman, and we are going to draw him slightly from below as it is shown in the photo. It's not a perfectly straight on photograph where the camera's just a little below him. So this is where we can really emphasize the upper eyelid versus the lower eyelid. It's a lot more helpful to discover which direction the form lines are going to be going. This is all stuff that I explained in my beginner drawing course 2nd edition, because it really helps to have some terminology to apply when you're working on studies like this. But these were the eyes, and the eyes were helpful to study because you always just want to be getting better and better at eyes all the time. It's something that really helps us connect to characters, so if you're going to mess up somewhere on the face, it had best not be the eyes. So the next study we're moving on to here is a thicker female body type. Of course, I want to have a lot of variation amidst the characters that I can create, and so I want characters that are very thin, characters that have more of a body mass index, and it really helps to look up some plus-size models on Pinterest or something, because it's important to represent a diverse array of people, because oftentimes in media we are not able to see that. However, I will say it's getting much, much better in this day and age, and we can see that everybody is truly built different. You have people with much thicker wrists, and they tend to carry much more adipose tissue just because that's how their body stores it. They have much bigger bones, like actually the bones are thicker, and they have a propensity to grasp more fat from the food and store more fat, or at least they look like bigger people even if they have a lower body mass index. So this is just me looking at things like how large the waist is versus the size of the head. So it's like, well, you can probably fit about 2.5 heads across her shoulder girdle, maybe even 3 or close to 3, which is something that I was considering as I was drawing this and just going full body here, as opposed to, well, close to full body. It's more of a portrait. And it's like, okay, well, where is some of the adipose tissue overlapping, like on the waist there? And you can see that there's not a lot of definition in the arms. There's not a lot of definition wherein you can see the bony areas, because it's covered up by more tissue, obviously, more fat pads. So this is helpful to understand when somebody has this type of body composition. You can find that you only have to draw certain areas, or there are certain shapes that actually emphasize more so the composition of the body. So this is something that I would have to go back and try to draw a character from imagination, take some more notes. I wasn't highlighting it in these last few demonstrations simply because I kind of fell into bad habits again of just kind of doing the study and trying to remember it that way. But now I'm going to go into a demo portion where you'll see me drawing all these things from imagination, and you'll see that I'm able to draw the things that I took notes on and highlighted from imagination way better than I am something that I didn't and just kind of drew straight through and hope to retain the information from. So if there's anything that you take away from this video when it comes to studying anatomy, it's that you just want to be breaking down the shapes and the proportions and getting the general ideas that are going to help you when it comes to these situations of drawing various anatomical aspects or whatever it is you're studying, because you want to be able to grasp the big things, the things that are going to apply in many situations. Of course, this is the most helpful because you're able to have the most freedom, but you can get into some specifics as well, like some very small details and ideas for very specific poses or specific body types, specific angles. These are also helpful to study as well because it does add to your broad general knowledge at the end of the day. So now you can see in these demonstrations, I'm going in and there is no reference being used. It's just character sketching from what we tried to learn today. Again, I want to repeat that it can seem really daunting as a beginner to just jump in and start doing studies, thinking of all these different poses and postures and the weight distribution and adipose tissue and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's really important to remember that it is just a step-by-step journey. You can just do one thing a day, just draw a couple poses a day, try them from your imagination, and see what you can remember. Remember to take notes and highlight certain sections so you can get a better feel for them. And as you can see, those two turned out pretty good from imagination. And from the front, I struggled a lot more to conceive of the shapes and the distribution of the lines and just a bunch of stuff in general because I wasn't as careful to figure out what my notes were going to be or what areas I was going to highlight, and thus it was more challenging to create these poses from imagination, as well as it was more challenging to configure how they we're going to just look. And I guess it's a little harder because when you're drawing something from the back, you don't have to really draw the face per se, whereas you do have to consider the face from the front. And this girl is just slightly thicker than, I guess she's about an average build, and it works pretty okay. She looks like she's still into fitness and maybe has some sort of weightlifting sport and just, has a little bit of extra body fat, but not as much as the girl that I'm going to try drawing from imagination next. In this case, I was really trying to replicate much closer to the reference photo and that outfit when I was drawing this girl, just thinking about how her jeans were placed on her body, what she was trying to emphasize with her clothing choices. And so I'm not just thinking about the anatomy in general because I'm not drawing nude figures. In this case, I'm drawing clothed figures. So it's where are the clothes stopping? What are the termination points? It's like right above the belly button or right around the belly button area. And then you again have to think about how thick her wrists were, how wide her shoulder girdle was, and if I can replicate that in a different format. And this one came out a little bit better because I stuck slightly closer to the reference in terms of the body composition and in terms of just some of the overall pose and energy. So again, I just want to thank you for watching this video. If you want a simple anatomy for artists course, I have that really affordable in the description box for you, as well as my beginner drawing course in general for all the broad fundamental principles you need to take your art to the next level. This has been Taylor Payton, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and happy drawing.